Part 1. The Overlooked Soldier. The morning sun cast long shadows across Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos walked toward the mess hall. Her Barrett M82 sniper rifle hung securely across her back, its weight as familiar as her own heartbeat. The weapon was her constant companion, yet to most people on the base, it might as well have been invisible. General William Harrison sat at his usual table in the corner of the mess hall, surrounded by his trusted male officers. At 60 years old, the general had served in 3 different wars and commanded respect from everyone under his authority. His gray hair was always perfectly trimmed, his uniform always spotless, and his opinions about military service were as rigid as steel. When Santos entered the dining area, the general's eyes briefly swept over her before returning to his conversation with Major Thompson about the latest patrol reports. To Harrison, she was just another face in the crowd of support personnel. He had grown up in a military where women served in administration and medical roles, far from the dangerous work of combat operations. Santos collected her breakfast tray and found a seat near the window. She ate quietly while studying the mountain ridges that surrounded their base. Her mind automatically calculated distances and wind patterns, a habit she had developed during her childhood in rural Texas. Her father had been a competitive long-range shooter who taught her that every detail mattered when taking difficult shots. The other soldiers at her table talked about their upcoming missions and complained about the desert heat. Corporal Jenkins mentioned seeing Taliban movement in the northern hills. Sergeant Davis worried about the supply convoy that was 2 days late. Santos listened carefully but contributed little to the conversation. She had learned early in her military career that action spoke louder than words. 3 tables away, General Harrison continued his morning briefing with his senior staff. He discussed patrol routes, equipment needs, and personnel assignments. His voice carried the confidence of a leader who had never doubted his own judgment. When Lieutenant Colonel Martinez suggested assigning Santos to an advanced reconnaissance mission, Harrison barely looked up from his coffee. The general had specific ideas about what made a good soldier. In his mind, combat effectiveness came from size, strength, and an aggressive attitude. He valued the loud confidence of soldiers like Sergeant Murphy, who could bench press twice his body weight and never backed down from a fight. Santos, with her quiet demeanor and careful movements, did not fit his mental picture of a warrior. After breakfast, Santos walked to the armory to clean her rifle. The Barrett M82 was a precision instrument that demanded daily maintenance. She disassembled the weapon with practiced efficiency, cleaning each component with the care of a master craftsman. The rifle was her lifeline, and she treated it with appropriate respect. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez found her there an hour later, working methodically through her cleaning routine. Rodriguez had been Santos's immediate supervisor for 6 months, and had watched her develop into one of the most skilled marksmen he had ever seen. He respected her dedication and professional attitude, but he also understood the challenges she faced in a male-dominated environment. Rodriguez had tried several times to get Santos noticed by the higher command. He submitted reports about her exceptional shooting scores and recommended her for advanced training opportunities. Each time his requests seemed to disappear into the administrative maze without generating any interest from General Harrison or his staff. The base operated on a predictable schedule that had been established over months of routine. Morning briefings, patrol assignments, equipment checks, and evening reports created a rhythm that everyone followed. Santos fit into this routine perfectly, performing her duties with quiet efficiency while preparing for opportunities that might never come. During afternoon training sessions, Santos often practiced at the long-range shooting facility. The other soldiers had grown accustomed to hearing the distinctive boom of her Barrett echoing across the desert. Some of them gathered to watch her shoot, impressed by her ability to hit targets at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. Corporal Williams had once asked Santos how she learned to shoot so well. She explained that her father had taught her the fundamentals when she was 12 years old, starting with a simple hunting rifle and gradually working up to more challenging weapons and longer distances. By the time she joined the Army, she could consistently hit targets that most people could barely see. The training facility's longest target stood at 800 meters, which Santos could hit reliably even in difficult wind conditions. She knew that real combat situations might require much longer shots, so she studied ballistics tables and practiced calculating adjustments for different scenarios. Her notebook contained detailed records of atmospheric conditions and their effects on bullet trajectory. General Harrison occasionally walked past the shooting range during his base inspections, but he rarely paid attention to who was firing or how well they performed. His focus remained on the big-picture issues of base security and mission planning. Individual soldier performance was something he left to lower-ranking officers unless a problem required his direct intervention. The evening brought another routine dinner in the mess hall. Santos sat with the same group of soldiers, listening to their stories and observations about the day's activities. Sergeant Davis had heard rumors about increased enemy activity in the surrounding mountains. Corporal Jenkins reported seeing unfamiliar vehicle tracks during his patrol. These small details interested Santos because they painted a picture of changing tactical situations. She understood that intelligence often came from piecing together seemingly unrelated observations. Her analytical mind automatically processed these fragments of information, looking for patterns that others might miss. As the sun set behind the western mountains, Santos returned to her quarters to prepare for another day. She checked her equipment, reviewed her training notes, and maintained the patient attitude that defined her approach to military service. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and perhaps new opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities. General Harrison ended his day as he always did, reviewing reports and planning the next day's operations. His desk lamp cast a small circle of light in the otherwise dark command building. Outside his window, the base settled into its nighttime security posture, protected by soldiers whose individual talents he had never taken the time to fully understand. In her small room across the base, Santos cleaned her rifle one final time before sleep. The Barrett's metal surfaces gleamed under the overhead light, ready for whatever challenges the next day might bring. She had no way of knowing that very soon. Both her patience and her exceptional skills would be tested in ways that would change everything. The base slept peacefully under a canopy of desert stars, unaware that enemy eyes were already watching from the distant mountains. The intelligence reports arrived at Forward Operating Base Phoenix just before dawn on Tuesday morning. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez rushed to General Harrison's office with a folder marked urgent, his boots echoing through the empty corridors of the command building. The information inside would change everything at the base and put every soldier's life in immediate danger. 3 days earlier, intercepted radio communications had revealed unusual Taliban activity in the mountain regions surrounding the base. Enemy fighters were moving equipment and personnel toward elevated positions overlooking the American outpost. The messages were coded, but military intelligence specialists had worked around the clock to decode their true meaning. The Taliban had grown frustrated with their inability to inflict significant damage on the well-defended base. Previous attacks using rockets and mortars had failed to penetrate the defensive barriers. Suicide bombers could not get close enough to cause meaningful harm. Direct assaults resulted in heavy Taliban casualties without achieving their objectives. The American position seemed impossible to crack using conventional tactics. Frustrated commanders in the Taliban leadership had decided to try a completely different approach. Instead of attacking with large numbers of fighters, they would use a single skilled marksman to eliminate key American personnel. The plan was simple but potentially devastating. One shooter, positioned at extreme range, could terrorize the entire base and make normal operations impossible. The man chosen for this mission was known throughout the region as Ahmad the Ghost. His real name was Ahmad Hassan, but fighters called him the Ghost because of his ability to appear and disappear without being detected. He had been hunting American soldiers for 3 years, moving like a shadow through the mountains of Afghanistan. Ahmad had grown up in these same mountains, learning to shoot by hunting wild goats on impossible cliff faces. His father had been a marksman during the Soviet invasion, and his grandfather had fought against British forces decades earlier. The rifle skills had been passed down through generations, refined by constant practice and strengthened by deep hatred for foreign invaders. The weapon Ahmad carried was a modified Dragunov sniper rifle that had been captured from Soviet forces years earlier. Local gunsmiths had worked on the rifle for months, improving its accuracy and range. They had added a better scope, adjusted the trigger mechanism, and hand-loaded special ammunition designed for maximum effectiveness at long distances. Stories about Ahmad's shooting abilities had spread throughout the Taliban network. Fighters whispered about impossible shots he had made, targets eliminated at distances that seemed beyond human capability. Some claimed he could hit a man's head at 2,000 meters. Others insisted they had seen him kill American soldiers from positions so far away that the sound of his rifle could not even be heard. Intelligence. Reports suggested that Ahmad had been responsible for at least 12 confirmed kills of American and coalition forces. His victims included 2 officers, several experienced sergeants, and a military contractor who had been considered one of the best security specialists in the region. Each killing had been accomplished with a single shot from an unknown location. The Taliban plan was carefully designed to maximize psychological impact while minimizing their own risk. Ahmad would position himself on one of the distant ridges that surrounded the base like the walls of a natural stadium. From there, he would wait patiently for high-value targets to present themselves during routine activities. The morning briefing sessions were particularly attractive targets because they brought together multiple officers in a predictable location at a known time. If Ahmad could eliminate General Harrison and several of his senior staff with carefully placed shots, the entire base would be thrown into chaos. Leadership would be disrupted, morale would collapse, and normal operations would become impossible. The mountain terrain around the base provided countless potential shooting positions. Rocky outcroppings, cave systems, and deep valleys offered concealment for a skilled marksman who knew how to use the landscape to his advantage. Ahmad had spent weeks studying the base through powerful binoculars, memorizing the daily routines and identifying the best opportunities. Weather conditions in the region were nearly perfect for long-range shooting. The desert air was clear and dry, with minimal atmospheric distortion. Wind patterns were predictable, following the natural channels created by the mountain valleys. An experienced marksman could calculate the necessary adjustments and make shots that would be impossible in other environments. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez finished reading the intelligence summary and immediately understood the severity of the threat. A skilled enemy sniper operating from extreme range could effectively shut down normal base operations. Personnel would be forced to remain under cover, missions would be canceled, and the entire outpost would be paralyzed by fear of a single hidden gunman. General Harrison listened grimly as Martinez explained the situation. The intercepted communications indicated that Ahmad was already moving into position somewhere in the surrounding mountains. Satellite imagery showed possible camping sites and equipment caches that suggested a long-term operation. The Taliban sniper was prepared to wait as long as necessary for the perfect opportunity. Traditional counter-sniper tactics would require extensive resources and could take days or weeks to complete successfully. The mountains offered thousands of potential hiding places spread across dozens of square kilometers. A thorough search would require multiple helicopter flights, ground teams, and specialized equipment that was not readily available at the remote base. Even worse, any attempt to locate Ahmad would alert him to American awareness of his presence. The Taliban marksman could simply relocate to a different position and continue his patient hunt from a new hiding place. The vast wilderness around the base provided unlimited opportunities for concealment and movement. The morning briefing that day took place inside the heavily protected command bunker instead of the usual outdoor location. General Harrison explained the threat to his senior staff while emphasizing the need to maintain normal operations as much as possible. However, everyone understood that until the enemy sniper was neutralized, every step outside covered buildings would carry deadly risk. Security protocols were immediately enhanced throughout the base. Soldiers were ordered to move between buildings only when absolutely necessary, and to use covered walkways whenever possible. Lookouts were posted with instructions to scan the distant ridges for any signs of enemy activity. Radio operators monitored Taliban communications channels for additional intelligence about Ahmad's location and intentions. The base settled into an uncomfortable state of siege, knowing that somewhere in the surrounding mountains, a skilled killer was watching and waiting for the perfect shot. Every soldier understood that normal life would remain impossible until the hidden threat was eliminated, but none of them knew how long that might take or what price would be paid before the danger passed. The emergency briefing room filled with tension as thick as the desert dust that coated everything at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. General Harrison stood at the front of the room, pointing at a large map that showed the mountainous terrain surrounding their position. Red circles marked the suspected locations where Ahmad the Ghost might be hiding with his deadly rifle. Staff Sergeant Santos sat in the back row, listening carefully as intelligence officers explained what they knew about the Taliban sniper's capabilities. Her trained eye studied the topographical map, automatically calculating distances from the marked positions to key locations around the base. The numbers that formed in her mind made her stomach tighten with understanding. Major Thompson used a laser pointer to highlight the closest suspected sniper position on the eastern ridge. The red dot moved across the map as he explained that this location offered clear sight lines to the main administrative buildings. Santos quickly estimated the range in her head, 2,400 meters. Difficult but possible for an experienced marksman with the right equipment. The laser pointer moved to another potential hiding spot on the northern slope. This position provided excellent concealment among the rocky outcroppings while maintaining visual contact with the helicopter landing pad and motor pool area. Santos calculated this distance as well, 2,800 meters. Even more challenging, but still within the realm of possibility for someone with exceptional skills. Then Major Thompson highlighted the position that made every officer in the room shift uncomfortably in their seats. The far western ridge offered the highest elevation and the most comprehensive view of the entire base. From that rocky summit, an enemy sniper could observe and engage targets across the full spectrum of American operations. Santos felt her breath catch as she worked out the mathematics of this final position. 3,200 meters, more than 3 kilometers, nearly 2 miles of empty air between the shooter and any target on the base. The distance was so extreme that most people would consider it impossible for accurate rifle fire. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez explained to the assembled officers that traditional sniper training focused on engagements between 600 and 800 meters. Even elite military marksmen rarely attempted shots beyond 1,500 meters in actual combat situations. The distances they were discussing went far beyond normal operational parameters. The physics involved in such long-range shooting were staggering. Santos had studied ballistics extensively and understood exactly what 3,200 meters meant in practical terms. A bullet fired from that distance would take more than 3 seconds to reach its target. During that flight time, gravity would pull the projectile down by nearly 40 feet. Wind effects became exponentially more complicated at extreme ranges. A gentle breeze that might push a bullet 6 inches off target at 800 meters could cause a complete miss by several feet at 3,200 meters. The shooter would need to account for wind speed and direction at multiple elevations as the bullet traveled through different atmospheric layers. Temperature and humidity also played crucial roles in long-distance accuracy. The thin mountain air would affect bullet velocity differently than the thicker atmosphere at sea level. Barometric pressure changes could alter the trajectory by significant amounts. Even the rotation of the Earth became a factor that required mathematical compensation. Santos had been practicing extreme long-range shooting. Since her teenage years in Texas, her father had taught her about these advanced concepts, but she had never attempted a shot at 3,200 meters in actual combat conditions. The longest confirmed kill she had made was at 1,800 meters during a training exercise, and that had required perfect weather and multiple practice rounds to achieve. The Barrett M82 rifle that Santos carried was theoretically capable of accurate fire at such distances. The powerful .50 caliber cartridge maintained sufficient velocity and energy to be lethal, even after traveling more than 3 kilometers. However, the weapon was only as good as the person using it, and very few individuals possess the combination of skills necessary for such extreme precision. Captain Rodriguez noticed Santos taking detailed notes during the briefing and saw her sketching trajectory calculations in the margins of her notebook. He had worked with her long enough to recognize the intense concentration that meant she was solving complex problems in her head. Her quiet confidence in mathematical situations had impressed him many times before. The briefing continued with discussions of conventional response options. Helicopter patrols could search the suspected areas, but the mountainous terrain offered countless hiding places for a skilled individual. Ground teams might eventually locate the sniper, but such operations would take days or weeks to complete systematically. Artillery strikes could bombard the general areas where Ahmad might be positioned, but without precise target coordinates, the chances of success were minimal. The Taliban marksmen could easily move between positions, staying one step ahead of any conventional military response. Meanwhile, normal base operations would remain paralyzed by the constant threat. General Harrison asked his senior staff for recommendations, but none of the proposed solutions offered quick resolution of the crisis. Every option involved significant time, resources, and risk to American personnel. The frustration in the room was obvious, as experienced officers struggled with a problem that seemed to have no good answers. Santos continued her silent calculations. Working through the variables that would affect an extreme long-range engagement, she considered wind patterns she had observed during her months at the base. She remembered atmospheric conditions at different times of day. She thought about the specific capabilities of her Barrett rifle and the match-grade ammunition she used for precision shooting. The mathematical challenge fascinated her, even as it terrified her. 3,200 meters represented the absolute edge of what was theoretically possible with current technology and human skill. Success would require perfect conditions, flawless technique, and an exceptional understanding of ballistic science. As the briefing concluded, Santos realized that conventional military thinking might not be sufficient to solve this particular problem. The Taliban had chosen their strategy specifically because it exploited the limitations of traditional counter-sniper tactics. Ahmad's extreme range advantage made him nearly untouchable, using standard operational procedures. Walking back to her quarters after the meeting, Santos looked up at the distant western ridge where the enemy marksmen might be positioned. The rocky summit seemed impossibly far away, barely visible even in the clear desert air. Somewhere among those ancient stones, a skilled killer was preparing to wage psychological warfare against an entire American military base. That evening, Santos cleaned her Barrett rifle with even more care than usual, wondering if she would ever have the opportunity to test her skills against such an extreme challenge. The clock in the mess hall showed 6:30 in the morning when Staff Sergeant Santos found Captain Rodriguez sitting alone with his coffee and a stack of intelligence reports. Dark circles under his eyes revealed that he had spent most of the night studying the Taliban sniper threat and searching for solutions that seemed impossible to find. Santos approached his table, with her own breakfast tray, moving quietly to avoid disturbing other soldiers who were discussing the lockdown procedures that had been implemented across the base. Everyone understood that normal operations had been suspended until the hidden enemy marksman could be located and eliminated. Captain Rodriguez looked up as Santos sat down across from him. He had been her immediate supervisor for 8 months and had developed tremendous respect for her professional abilities and analytical thinking. During their time working together, she had proven herself to be one of the most capable soldiers under his command. Santos spoke in a low voice that would not carry to nearby tables. She told Rodriguez that she had been studying the topographical maps and weather data from the previous evening's briefing. Based on her calculations and observations of local atmospheric conditions, she believed she had identified the most likely position for the Taliban sniper. Rodriguez listened with growing interest as Santos explained her reasoning. The western ridge offered the best combination of concealment, elevation, and sight lines to critical targets around the base. Wind patterns in that area were predictable due to the natural formation of the mountain valleys. Most importantly, the extreme range would make the position seem safe from any American response. The distance measurement that Santos had calculated made Rodriguez pause in the middle of drinking his coffee. 3,247 meters based on satellite imagery and elevation data from the base survey records. The number was so large that it seemed beyond the realm of practical military operations. Santos continued her explanation with calm confidence that impressed Rodriguez even more than her technical analysis. She had been tracking atmospheric conditions at the base for several weeks as part of her ongoing training regimen. Morning hours offered the most stable air density and minimal wind interference. Temperature inversions created predictable bullet drift patterns. Rodriguez asked Santos directly if she believed such a shot was possible with current equipment and training. Her answer was measured and honest. The Barrett M82 rifle was capable of accuracy at that range when used by someone with sufficient skill and knowledge. The challenge was not the weapon's capability, but the human factors involved in making such a precise calculation. The conversation was interrupted when Sergeant Davis approached their table. With news that had just come through the communication center, Satellite surveillance had detected possible movement on the western ridge during the early morning hours. The imagery was not clear enough to confirm enemy presence, but the timing and location matched the intelligence estimates perfectly. After Davis returned to his duties, Rodriguez looked directly at Santos and asked the question that had been forming in his mind throughout their conversation. Did she believe she could make such a shot if given the opportunity? Santos met his gaze without hesitation and answered that she had been training for exactly this type of challenge. Her entire military career, Rodriguez knew that Santos had achieved the highest marksmanship scores in their unit. During every qualification period since her arrival, he had watched her practice at the long-range facility and had been consistently amazed by her ability to hit targets that challenged even experienced shooters. However, the distance they were discussing was far beyond anything attempted at their training facility. Santos explained that her background in competitive long-range shooting had prepared her for challenges that went beyond standard military training. Her father had taught her advanced ballistics calculation methods that were used in civilian precision shooting competitions. She had studied atmospheric effects, bullet performance characteristics, and mathematical compensation techniques. The technical knowledge that Santos demonstrated during their conversation convinced Rodriguez that she might represent their best hope for resolving the crisis quickly. Traditional military responses would take days or weeks to implement successfully. Meanwhile, Ahmad the Ghost would remain free to terrorize the base and eliminate key personnel at will. Rodriguez faced a difficult decision about how to present Santos's proposal to the higher command structure. General Harrison had made his opinions about women in combat roles clear through numerous statements and policy decisions. Convincing him to consider Santos for such a critical mission would require careful presentation and strong supporting arguments. The risk of failure was enormous for everyone involved. If Santos attempted the shot and missed, the Taliban sniper would be alerted to American awareness of his position. Ahmad could relocate to a different hiding place and continue his psychological warfare from a new location. The opportunity for surprise would be lost permanently. Even worse, failure might result in immediate retaliation against the base. Ahmad could accelerate his timeline and begin engaging targets before American forces could implement alternative response strategies. The consequences of an unsuccessful counter-sniper operation could be measured in American lives. Rodriguez also understood the career implications of recommending Santos for such a high-profile mission. If she succeeded, everyone involved would share in the recognition and advancement opportunities. If she failed, the responsibility would fall on him for suggesting an unproven approach to a critical tactical problem. Despite these concerns, Rodriguez found himself convinced by Santos's technical knowledge and quiet confidence. Her analysis of the situation was more thorough than anything he had seen from the intelligence specialists. Her understanding of long-range shooting principles was clearly superior to that of other personnel available at the base. The conversation concluded with Rodriguez agreeing to present Santos's assessment to Lieutenant Colonel Martinez during the morning staff meeting. He would emphasize her technical qualifications and explain the reasoning behind her tactical recommendations. The decision about whether to pursue her proposal would ultimately rest with General Harrison. Santos thanked Rodriguez for his willingness to support her initiative. She understood the professional risks he was taking by advocating for her unconventional approach to the sniper problem. Military careers had been ended by far smaller mistakes in judgment than recommending a female soldier for a mission traditionally reserved for elite male specialists. As they prepared to leave the mess hall, Rodriguez asked Santos to spend the morning reviewing her calculations and preparing detailed documentation of her proposed solution. If the command structure decided to consider her recommendation, they would want specific information about equipment requirements, timing factors, and probability assessments. Santos spent the rest of the morning in her quarters, working through mathematical calculations and creating detailed charts of atmospheric conditions. She knew that this might be her only opportunity to prove her capabilities at the highest level of military operations. Every number would need to be perfect if she hoped to convince skeptical senior officers that her impossible plan could actually work. The future of the entire base might depend on her ability to explain complex ballistic science to commanders who had never considered the possibility that a female soldier could provide the solution to their most dangerous tactical challenge. The command briefing room felt smaller than usual as Captain Rodriguez stood before General Harrison, with Santos's detailed analysis in his hands. The morning light streaming through the reinforced windows seemed harsh and unforgiving as Rodriguez prepared to present what he knew would be a controversial recommendation to his commanding officer, General. Harrison sat behind his metal desk with Lieutenant Colonel Martinez and Major Thompson flanking him on either side. The three senior officers had spent the previous 2 hours reviewing conventional response options to the Taliban sniper threat. Every proposal required significant time and resources without guaranteeing success against their elusive enemy. Rodriguez began his presentation by summarizing Santos's technical analysis of the suspected sniper position. He explained her calculations about distance, atmospheric conditions, and optimal engagement windows. The mathematical precision of her work impressed the officers, but General Harrison's expression remained skeptical throughout the entire briefing. When Rodriguez mentioned that Santos believed she could make the 3,200-meter shot herself, General Harrison's reaction was immediate and predictable. He questioned why they would consider risking an unproven soldier on such a critical mission when experienced male snipers were available for assignment to the base. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez pointed out that the experienced snipers Harrison referenced would require several days to arrive by helicopter transport. During that time, Ahmad the Ghost would remain free to engage targets of opportunity around the base. Normal operations would stay suspended, and the psychological pressure on all personnel would continue to increase. Rodriguez carefully explained that Santos had achieved the highest marksmanship scores in their unit. During every qualification period since her arrival, her performance at the long-range training facility had consistently exceeded that of other personnel. More importantly, her background in competitive precision shooting provided skills that went beyond standard military training. General Harrison remained unconvinced by these arguments. His decades of military experience had taught him to rely on proven methods and experienced personnel for critical operations. The idea of entrusting such an important mission to a female soldier challenged his fundamental beliefs about combat effectiveness and tactical decision-making. Major Thompson suggested that they could at least evaluate Santos's shooting abilities before making any final decisions. The base's long-range training facility included targets out to 1,200 meters, which would provide some indication of her basic competency with precision rifle work. If she failed to demonstrate adequate skills, they could abandon the proposal without any operational consequences. The suggestion appealed to General Harrison because it offered a way to disprove Santos' capabilities while appearing to give her a fair opportunity. He expected her to fail the demonstration, which would justify his instinctive rejection of Rodriguez's unconventional recommendation. The test would settle the matter decisively in his mind. Rodriguez accepted the challenge on Santos's behalf, knowing that she would want the opportunity to prove herself regardless of the circumstances. He requested permission to inform Santos about the test and allow her time to prepare her equipment properly. General Harrison agreed, but insisted that the demonstration take place within 2 hours. Santos received the news about the shooting test with calm determination that impressed Rodriguez. She had been expecting some form of evaluation process and had already prepared her Barrett rifle for optimal performance. The 1,200-meter targets would be significantly shorter than the actual mission distance, but they would demonstrate her fundamental precision shooting abilities. Word about the upcoming test spread quickly through the base despite attempts to maintain operational security. Soldiers found excuses to be near the shooting range during the scheduled demonstration time. Some were supportive of Santos and wanted to witness her success. Others were curious to see if the rumors about her exceptional abilities were actually true. Sergeant Davis and Corporal Jenkins positioned themselves where they could observe the entire test without interfering with official procedures. They had both watched Santos practice at the range many times and believed she would perform well under pressure. Their presence provided moral support even though Santos appeared completely focused on her technical preparations. The Barrett M82 rifle that Santos carried to the range had been meticulously maintained and carefully zeroed for long-distance accuracy. She had hand-loaded her ammunition using precise powder charges and match-grade bullets. Every component of her shooting system had been optimized for maximum performance under challenging conditions. General Harrison arrived at the range accompanied by his senior staff and several other officers who had heard about the unusual demonstration. The crowd made Santos slightly uncomfortable, but she forced herself to focus on the technical aspects of the shooting challenge rather than the political implications of her performance. The 1,200-meter targets appeared tiny through Santos's rifle scope, but they were clearly visible in the stable morning air. She had engaged similar targets hundreds of times during practice sessions and understood exactly what adjustments were needed for current atmospheric conditions. The mathematical calculations were routine for someone with her background and experience. Santos's first shot struck dead center in the target zone, producing an immediate murmur of approval from the watching soldiers. Her second shot grouped perfectly with the first, demonstrating consistency rather than luck. By her third shot, even the skeptical officers were beginning to pay serious attention to her remarkable accuracy. The fourth and fifth shots completed a group that could be covered by a silver dollar coin. The precision was extraordinary even by the standards of experienced military marksmen. Santos had proven that her reputation for exceptional shooting was completely justified by her actual performance under observation. General Harrison examined the target through powerful binoculars and found himself unable to criticize Santos's demonstration. The shooting group was tighter than anything he had seen from other snipers during his long military career. Her technical competence was undeniable regardless of his personal opinions about women in combat roles. Lieutenant Colonel Martinez quietly pointed out that Santos had just demonstrated shooting skills that exceeded the qualifications of most elite military specialists. Her performance under pressure suggested that she possessed the mental discipline necessary for high-stakes tactical operations. The question was no longer whether she could shoot accurately, but whether the command structure was willing to trust her with a critical mission. Rodriguez watched General Harrison's expression carefully as the older officer processed what he had just witnessed. The demonstration had achieved its primary purpose of proving Santos's technical capabilities, but the larger question of command approval remained unresolved. Military protocol and personal prejudices were battling against tactical necessity and obvious competence. The crowd of watching soldiers began to disperse as the formal test concluded, but the conversation between senior officers continued for several more minutes. Santos remained at the shooting position, cleaning her rifle and waiting for official word about whether her proposal would be approved or rejected. The fate of the entire base might depend on General Harrison's willingness to overcome his traditional thinking and trust a female soldier with the most challenging shot any of them had ever attempted. Part 6, the 3,200-meter shot. The first pale light of dawn crept across the mountains surrounding Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Staff Sergeant Santos climbed the metal stairs to the highest observation tower. Her Barrett M82 rifle was carefully secured across her back, and her equipment bag contained everything she would need for the most challenging shot of her life. General Harrison had given his reluctant approval for the mission after witnessing Santos' exceptional performance at the shooting range. The decision had not come easily for the old soldier, but the threat posed by Ahmad the Ghost left him with limited options. Normal base operations could not continue while an enemy sniper held them under siege from the distant mountains. Santos had spent the entire previous evening calculating every variable that would affect her shot. Temperature readings, humidity levels, barometric pressure, and wind speed measurements filled 3 pages of her notebook. She had studied weather patterns for the past week and identified the optimal time window when atmospheric conditions would be most stable. The observation tower provided the highest elevation available within the base perimeter and offered an unobstructed view of the western ridge where intelligence reports suggested Ahmad had positioned himself. From this vantage point, Santos could see the rocky outcroppings and cliff faces that provided perfect concealment for a skilled marksman. Captain Rodriguez accompanied Santos to the tower, carrying additional equipment and serving as her spotter for the mission. He had volunteered for this role despite the personal risk involved in supporting such an unconventional operation. His career would be seriously damaged if the mission failed, but he believed completely in Santos's abilities. The Barrett rifle was mounted on a specialized bipod that had been adjusted for maximum stability. Santos had test-fired the weapon the previous afternoon to verify that her scope settings were perfect for the calculated distance. Every component of her shooting system had been checked and rechecked until she was completely satisfied with the preparation. Through her high-powered scope, Santos could barely make out the suspected sniper position on the distant ridge. The magnification revealed rocky formations and shadowed areas where a skilled marksman could remain hidden while maintaining visual contact with the American base. The distance was so extreme that individual features were difficult to distinguish. Ahmad the Ghost had been patient throughout his approach to the target area, moving only during darkness and remaining completely motionless during daylight hours. His years of experience had taught him that successful sniping required infinite patience and absolute discipline. He had been watching the American base for 2 days, memorizing activity patterns and selecting the best targets. The Taliban marksman had identified General Harrison as his primary objective based on observations of command structure and daily routines. Eliminating the American commander would create maximum disruption and psychological impact among the enemy forces. Ahmad had positioned himself to have a clear shot at the outdoor briefing area where senior officers regularly gathered. Santos controlled her breathing and felt her heart rate slow as she entered the focused mental state that precision shooting required. Her father had taught her that successful long-range marksmanship was as much about mental discipline as physical technique. The mind had to be completely calm and clear of all distractions or emotional interference. The mathematical calculations that Santos had prepared the previous evening now became reality as she made final adjustments to her scope settings. Wind speed at multiple elevations, bullet drop over the extreme distance, atmospheric pressure effects, and even the rotation of the Earth all factored into her firing solution. Captain Rodriguez monitored radio communications while maintaining watch through his spotting scope. Intelligence reports suggested that Ahmad was already in his final shooting position and might begin engaging targets at any moment. The window of opportunity for preemptive action was closing rapidly as morning activities around the base increased. Santos tracked movement on the distant ridge through her rifle scope, searching for any sign of the enemy sniper among the rocky formations. The Taliban marksman was skilled at concealment, but eventually any shooter had to expose himself slightly in order to acquire and engage targets effectively. A tiny glint of reflected sunlight caught Santos's attention as she scanned the western ridge systematically. The reflection lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to reveal the approximate location of Ahmad's rifle scope. The enemy sniper was preparing to take his shot at American personnel below. Santos adjusted her point of aim based on the brief visual contact with the target area. The distance measurement that she had calculated showed 3,247 meters from her position to the suspected enemy location. The bullet would take more than 3 seconds to travel that distance through the thin mountain air. Ahmad the Ghost settled into his final firing position as he observed increased activity around the American command building. Through his rifle scope, he could see uniformed figures moving between structures and gathering in the outdoor briefing area. The opportunity he had been waiting for was finally presenting itself. Santos held her breath and felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that always preceded her most difficult shots. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final corrections for wind drift and bullet drop. Every hour of training and practice had prepared her for this single moment of truth. The crosshairs in Santos's scope centered on the tiny figure that was barely visible among the distant rocks. Ahmad was moving into position to engage American targets, unaware that he had already been detected and was now being hunted by someone with skills that matched his own. Santos squeezed the trigger with smooth, steady pressure that released the shot at exactly the right moment. The Barrett rifle's massive recoil rocked her entire body, but she maintained her scope picture to observe the bullet's impact. The thunderous boom of the .50 caliber cartridge echoed across the base and into the surrounding mountains. For 3 eternal seconds, Santos watched through her scope as the bullet traveled across more than 3 kilometers of empty air. Time seemed suspended as she waited to see if her calculations had been correct and her technique had been perfect. The future of everyone at the base depended on the precision of this single shot. Through the shimmering heat waves rising from the desert floor, Santos saw the distant figure of Ahmad the Ghost suddenly collapse among the rocky outcroppings. The impossible shot had found its target. eliminating the Taliban sniper and ending the siege that had paralyzed the American base for days. Part 6. The 3,200-meter shot. The first pale light of dawn crept across the mountains surrounding Forward Operating Base Phoenix as Staff Sergeant Santos climbed the metal stairs to the highest observation tower. Her Barrett M82 rifle was carefully secured across her back, and her equipment bag contained everything she would need for the most challenging shot of her life. General Harrison had given his reluctant approval for the mission after witnessing Santos' exceptional performance at the shooting range. The decision had not come easily for the old soldier, but the threat posed by Ahmad the Ghost left him with limited options. Normal base operations could not continue while an enemy sniper held them under siege from the distant mountains. Santos had spent the entire previous evening calculating every variable that would affect her shot. Temperature readings, humidity levels, barometric pressure, and wind speed measurements filled 3 pages of her notebook. She had studied weather patterns for the past week and identified the optimal time window when atmospheric conditions would be most stable. The observation tower provided the highest elevation available within the base perimeter and offered an unobstructed view of the western ridge where intelligence reports suggested Ahmad had positioned himself. From this vantage point, Santos could see the rocky outcroppings and cliff faces that provided perfect concealment for a skilled marksman. Captain Rodriguez accompanied Santos to the tower, carrying additional equipment and serving as her spotter for the mission. He had volunteered for this role despite the personal risk involved in supporting such an unconventional operation. His career would be seriously damaged if the mission failed, but he believed completely in Santos's abilities. The Barrett rifle was mounted on a specialized bipod that had been adjusted for maximum stability. Santos had test-fired the weapon the previous afternoon to verify that her scope settings were perfect for the calculated distance. Every component of her shooting system had been checked and rechecked until she was completely satisfied with the preparation. Through her high-powered scope, Santos could barely make out the suspected sniper position on the distant ridge. The magnification revealed rocky formations and shadowed areas where a skilled marksman could remain hidden while maintaining visual contact with the American base. The distance was so extreme that individual features were difficult to distinguish. Ahmad the Ghost had been patient throughout his approach to the target area, moving only during darkness and remaining completely motionless during daylight hours. His years of experience had taught him that successful sniping required infinite patience and absolute discipline. He had been watching the American base for 2 days, memorizing activity patterns and selecting the best targets. The Taliban marksman had identified General Harrison as his primary objective based on observations of command structure and daily routines. Eliminating the American commander would create maximum disruption and psychological impact among the enemy forces. Ahmad had positioned himself to have a clear shot at the outdoor briefing area where senior officers regularly gathered. Santos controlled her breathing and felt her heart rate slow as she entered the focused mental state that precision shooting required. Her father had taught her that successful long-range marksmanship was as much about mental discipline as physical technique. The mind had to be completely calm and clear of all distractions or emotional interference. The mathematical calculations that Santos had prepared the previous evening now became reality as she made final adjustments to her scope settings. Wind speed at multiple elevations, bullet drop over the extreme distance, atmospheric pressure effects, and even the rotation of the Earth all factored into her firing solution. Captain Rodriguez monitored radio communications while maintaining watch through his spotting scope. Intelligence reports suggested that Ahmad was already in his final shooting position and might begin engaging targets at any moment. The window of opportunity for preemptive action was closing rapidly as morning activities around the base increased. Santos tracked movement on the distant ridge through her rifle scope, searching for any sign of the enemy sniper among the rocky formations. The Taliban marksman was skilled at concealment, but eventually any shooter had to expose himself slightly in order to acquire and engage targets effectively. A tiny glint of reflected sunlight caught Santos's attention as she scanned the western ridge systematically. The reflection lasted only a fraction of a second, but it was enough to reveal the approximate location of Ahmad's rifle scope. The enemy sniper was preparing to take his shot at American personnel below, Santos adjusted her point of aim based on the brief visual contact with the target area. The distance measurement that she had calculated showed 3,247 meters from her position to the suspected enemy location. The bullet would take more than 3 seconds to travel that distance through the thin mountain air. Ahmad the Ghost settled into his final firing position as he observed increased activity around the American command building. Through his rifle scope, he could see uniformed figures moving between structures and gathering in the outdoor briefing area. The opportunity he had been waiting for was finally presenting itself. Santos held her breath and felt the familiar sensation of time slowing down that always preceded her most difficult shots. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger as she made final corrections for wind drift and bullet drop. Every hour of training and practice had prepared her for this single moment of truth. The crosshairs in Santos's scope centered on the tiny figure that was barely visible among the distant rocks. Ahmad was moving into position to engage American targets, unaware that he had already been detected and was now being hunted by someone with skills that matched his own. Santos squeezed the trigger with smooth, steady pressure that released the shot at exactly the right moment. The Barrett rifle's massive recoil rocked her entire body, but she maintained her scope picture to observe the bullet's impact. The thunderous boom of the .50 caliber cartridge echoed across the base and into the surrounding mountains. For 3 eternal seconds, Santos watched through her scope as the bullet traveled across more than 3 kilometers of empty air. Time seemed suspended as she waited to see if her calculations had been correct and her technique had been perfect. The future of everyone at the base depended on the precision of this single shot. Through the shimmering heat waves rising from the desert floor, Santos saw the distant figure of Ahmad the Ghost suddenly collapse among the rocky outcroppings. The impossible shot had found its target, eliminating the Taliban sniper and ending the siege that had paralyzed the American base for days.